Today I'm going to give you some nice surprises because I'm going to speak about extraterrestrials and all the wonderful work that we've done with them. These are not nasty extraterrestrials. They've always been very kind to us, and so I'm going to tell you some stories today, and I'm going to start with one which was one that Margot received when she was receiving her drop-in communicators, and his name is Ernest, and it's quite a long tale, but I'm sure you'll love it as I do. Ernest came from Chipping Sodbury in Gloucestershire, which wasn't far from where I lived in Bristol. And he came through to Margot to tell her of this wonderful experience he had. And this was what he said to her. I commend to you my writing. I was on your plane when the great Queen Victoria sat on the throne of England. I was not a very important personage of the community, but took interest in other people. Now I can pass my thoughts through your hand. My name is Ernest, and that is what I was and am, Ernest. Your world is so different now, and not good for man any longer. I was not wed. I was uncomfortable in the presence of fair ladies. I worked as a bookkeeper in a local business. I did not have so much spare time on my hands. My mother was an ailing widow who had to be attended from time to time. The countryside was my love. Every Sunday afternoon, wet or fine, I would put on stout boots and take a brisk walk across the fields and through the woods. I was always alone until one day. I did not travel to other parts of our great country, apart from once when young, visiting London with an uncle. That I did appreciate for the rest of my life, as I felt I could speak about sights such as the Tower of London and Westminster Abbey with authority to those less fortunate than me regarding seeing our capital city. After my mother passed on, I continued to live in the small house, and a woman came once a week and saw to my washing and mending and cleaned through. I had to pay her 1 6 for this whole day. I was informed that she took advantage of my good nature, but I had no choice. I still continued my Sunday walks and enjoyed it most of the autumn, as I was convinced that Gloucestershire at that time of year was sheer perfection. It was September 1888 that I really became positive that I was not alone when out walking. I had come to the field beyond the wood when I saw a figure, a man, I think. It wore trousers but had long hair. It was a warm day that September. I was carrying my jacket as I knew no one walked in the woods on a Sunday. Just ahead, entering the field, was a figure, very thin, about 6 feet tall, and with long brown hair. He seemed to be wearing a garment that was trousers and jacket all in one piece, and it was such a strange metallic material. It seemed to have an effect on me as I dropped my jacket. As I bent to pick it up, the man turned, and we looked at each other for a minute, and I was amazed at the depth of his eyes. It was as if I was staring at pools of vivid green. The man turned and fled, and I could not make out where he had gone. It was as if he had vanished in a puff of smoke. I went home completely perplexed and did not mention this to anyone that day. But after the next encounter, I told the vicar. Not a good idea. After my encounter, I spent the following week feeling quite tormented as I tried to reason with myself. I felt it was imagination, yet knew it was not, and I didn't dare tell anyone. The following Saturday, I was allowed to leave my place of business early to attend the wedding of an old school friend. After the service, I went to the bride's house to wish them well, as they embarked on their journey of matrimony that I was not to enjoy. I am not a total abstainer, but do not take much alcohol, and as I toasted the happy couple, I felt the vicar's eyes on me, as he is a man of strong principle and never imbibes. The next afternoon, I set off for my walk, and what I saw and immediately reported to the vicar made the reverend gentleman puff up and turn on me, accusing me of becoming an habitual drunkard. I went to the spot where I saw the strange man, and I was disappointed, yet relieved to find I was still alone. I crossed the field, and I felt compelled to retrace my steps. This was not a thing I usually did. I heard a sound, a very high-pitched squeaking, and there on the fringe of the wood were 3 men, dressed alike in the same one-piece garments as before. And as I approached, their voices seemed to become a normal sound, although I could not understand them. One of them beckoned to me and pointed, and in the clearing, just inside the wood, they took me to where there was a strange object, metal, about 20 feet across and circular. I'm afraid my courage failed me, and I turned and fled, and arrived at the vicarage panting and afraid, and I gabbled like a lunatic. Of course, I was reprimanded for being inebriated, and was looked upon as being the idiot of the community from then on. But all this was true, and no one should be doubted when reporting their observances when out walking. How often did I wish that I had not had those Sunday walks, as from that conversation with the vicar I was ostracised by the community. I held my job as I was an efficient and honest worker, but few people would stop and chat like they did before. 3 months went by, and I changed my walks. I went in the opposite direction. Then, just after another lonely Christmas, I set off in the old direction, and again was relieved that there were no men in the woods. It was the following spring that we were to meet again in the same place. They were not all the same men, though. One was somewhat shorter, and his hair was nearly black. The strange circular object was there, and they beckoned me again. This time I went cautiously forward, and a moving bridge from the ground to the machine took me into the doorway. Inside, there was a circular shelf around the wall with small lights and small boxes of metal with knobs and clock faces, or so it seemed to me. There was a 3-tiered bed where presumably the men slept. Everywhere was gleaming bright and perfectly clean, and with no other furniture. We seemed to have an understanding without speech, and I looked around me and then said, "Very nice." I presumed it was their home, which moved. I left this object by the same moving bridge, and I turned and waved my hand, and to my surprise, all 3 men did likewise. I returned home, and this time remained silent. I would not be laughed at again. I never saw them again, but returned every Sunday for the rest of my life. I will try to describe the smell and feeling of the machine as I entered. It felt beautifully warm without being overheated, as if in the midday sun. The floor was like rubber, with a firm softness, and so clean. But most of all, the strange smell, rather like a cross between sage and pine, very pleasant and fresh, but strange. Although I could not converse with the friendly men, we seemed to have some silent communication, which I can only assume meant that they were able to mesmerise me into understanding their thoughts. So I was able to have some of the workings of the interesting machine explained to me. The moving bridge, which was made of green metal, was able to be lifted up to form the door when the machine floated up in the air. The 3-tiered beds were not completely one on top of the other. They were rather like stairs, so that each man had a clear view from his bed to the glass-like roof. The base of the machine, which rested on the ground, was also a green-type metal, and by pressing a knob on one of the boxes, the base was drawn up into the floor. All very ingenious. That lovely smell of the sage and the pine trees haunted me. My 3 friendly men, who I must stress were so slender and graceful, and so quick-moving, were able to convey to me that the green fluid in one of the boxes was some sort of power that drove their machine. The liquid was extracted by some strange device from green stones. Some name like Zekalinka or Zekolitone was what I could make out of the silent speech we practiced. Whatever these stones were, it was obvious they were very, very important and precious. Time was gone so quickly while I was inside. I thought it was only minutes, but later when I consulted my pocket watch, I found I'd been with them for 3.5 hours. I arrived home far later than I usually did on my Sunday afternoon walks. My friends told me silently they could not understand why some earth people walked with sticks, had hair with no colour, and whose skin sagged with folds. As far as I could ascertain, wherever they came from, there was no such thing as old age with the infirmities of same. I tried to find out their lifespan, but it was rather difficult. The only thing I definitely understood was that 150 years was not old, and one of the men, who in my eyes looked 30, said he was 92. Were their years the same as ours? I could not understand their explanation. When I was slicing the bread for my morning toast, the knife slipped and sliced the top of my thumb. It bled profusely and I wrapped a bandage around it to stop the bleeding. It was nothing serious, just one of those deep cuts that throb and are annoying. While out walking, I was still aware of this, although the bleeding had stopped. After meeting my silent friends and spending so long in their strange machine, I became so interested I forgot my cut thumb. And upon reaching home much later, I removed the bandage to wash my hands. And to my amazement, there was no sign of a cut. Not a mark on my thumb. Not at all. I was quite mystified, and as the men did not touch me at all, it must have been some sort of magic in the air I breathed, sweet-smelling sage, pine tree air that could miraculously heal wounds. Every night before I closed my eyes in slumber, I saw those eyes, deep, deep green. I had never seen the sea in my lifetime, yet I felt this is what it must look like. I had, of course, seen pictures of the oceans. I also saw pictured in my mind the inside of the machine and one metal box on the ledge in particular, which seemed to contain fluid of a green nature, and in the liquid what looked like green stones. It was all very strange, as the men's eyes and the liquid were the same green, also the stones. How I wish I could have conversed properly, now such things are past. I was not insane or inebriated as the local people were led to believe. I am ashamed of the apprehension I felt as I approached the machine with the 3 men. They were such gentle creatures, so slender and quick in their movements, yet very graceful. I know now I was a privileged person to see them and their strange machine, and realised they were from another world. I called on my friend whose wedding I had attended. He and his moon-faced wife were most cool and offhand with me. Yet another friend lost. But although I was to be lonely in my latter years, I did not regret my meeting with the men from the stars, as that is where they came from. No one should fear them if they are all alike. The green stones, which seemed so precious to their well-being, and the power to their machines, to make their machines work, were quite a bright green, but not transparent like our type of stones. I cannot recall having seen an emerald, but have seen pictures and know they are transparent and clear. Not so those in the boxes, but its emerald in its natural state may not be as clear. The men seemed to treat the stone box and the box with fluid in as if it were a god, and paid it a sort of reverence. Strange behaviour towards stones. The beautiful green of the men's eyes and the Zekalinka stones was on my mind for some days. I reached the decision that unless I possessed something of this colour, I would never settle in my routine again. I visited the local tailor and inquired if he could make a waistcoat of this colour. But the man said he did not stock material of this colour and suggested a dark grey would be far more serviceable. I was quite adamant that it must be this bright green, and persuaded him that should I procure the material, he would make the garment. I was lucky enough to see such a shade of material in a lady's clothes shop. I felt very embarrassed, but succeeded in getting the lovely green material, and in due course had the waistcoat made. Of course, this was not the attire of a bookkeeper, and I could only wear it in the privacy of my own cottage in my spare time. But each evening, upon returning home from my place of business, I would don my green waistcoat and feel I was not alone, but my 3 silent men from the sky were near me. Purely imagination, but it helped me continue my routine life. After my wonderful experience with my green-eyed friends, I returned to the spot the following week and found the exact spot where the machine had stood. The grass had been burned away and the earth was scorched and bare. Yet outside this circle of earth, the grass and spring flowers, such as primroses, were far more lush than they had been before. The grass blades were thicker and larger, and the little flowers about 3 times their normal size. Could this be anything to do with the strange air from inside the machine, which had reached a radius of several feet outside where it had rested? What was the use of telling anyone? They wouldn't believe me. The flowers lasted longer than any others, as 4 weeks later they were still fresh, whereas those elsewhere had faded and died. The following year, everything was normal, except for the circle of earth where the machine stood. No grass grew there again, ever in my lifetime. After the first time I met the men from the stars, I returned home and wrote details of the incident in a small black notebook that had belonged to my mother and had not been used. As the vicar had been so unpleasant, I did not wish to talk about it, but I also wanted to record the facts. I was glad I did, as there was so much to write after the second meeting, and years later I was able to reread my book over and over again. The men were all clean-shaven. Their hair was long. I noticed their hands were free from hairs on the back, like so many country folk have, and their nails were perfectly shaped, far more like a woman who does not do rough work. I wish I could have been more like them, as in my eyes they seemed nearly perfect creatures. Not a mark or blemish on their faces, but for fairly tall men, their feet did seem uncommonly small. I did not like to comment on this, although I felt I should have asked if all their race were so small-footed. I hope they did not think me ill-mannered, as I fear I did rather stare at their feet. I would not have believed that anyone could have been so unpleasant as the vicar. Not only did I try to explain my experiences to him, but I also took a small sketch of the machine. The humiliation of unquestionable disbelief reviled me for some time against the church. He upbraided me on several occasions after this. Some other members of his household must have been listening, as it was all over the town by the next market day. I usually enjoyed a few minutes spent in the market during my dinner break on market day, but I overheard remarks directed against me, so that I did not venture there again for many weeks. I did not know who else to approach with my story, as it was obvious no one in my vicinity would accept it, and I wondered if anyone in London would believe me. I even thought of the Archbishop of Canterbury, or even Her Majesty, but my courage was not great enough to write to either. I wore my green waistcoat every Sunday when I went for my walk. I thought I could somehow attract my silent friends back, but it was no use. Nothing I could do would make them return. I did not attend church as regularly as I had before. The vicar was so unkind, but made a point of worshipping there just once a month. I prayed that the men were safe and happy wherever they were, and one day I would learn the secret of the green stones and fluid, but that was not to be. Well, as you can imagine, I just loved that story when Margot read it to me for the first time. However, we weren't to meet anyone else until some time later, because we were told that we had to have teaching and information, further information. And we used to go to a field, it's over St. Lawrence, overlooks St. Lawrence, and it's high, and it's behind the Knighton radio station. And we always called it Seven Sisters Field for some reason. Seven Sisters Road is down in St. Lawrence, but we just called this Seven Sisters Field. I do know now why, but then I didn't. And the person who came to Margot was someone called George Lillo. This was in 1984. And we were sitting in Seven Sisters Field, which is a wonderful place to sunbathe and enjoy the view. And this is where we met with this communicator, George Lillo, who was to teach us of the inner meanings and mysteries of life and the importance of space. He had experienced several lives on Earth, his last being as George Lillo, a dramatist and dealer in jewellery, who returned to spirit in 1739. George mentioned having 7 incarnations on other planets, and how easy it was for him to pass between the dimensions. And the purpose of his communication was to be our instructor on the mysteries before receiving any further communications from space. He told us that the monks and hermits of old knew that open spaces were important for communion between the dimensions, of which, he said, there were over 100. Apparently, this was the reason we had been guided to the field, where the only people we were likely to see were the occasional walkers. We, being humanity, were likened to a stone being thrown into a pool, with us at the centre of the ripples. The first ripple is the dimension of our guides, the second that of our galaxy, And so it goes on, all 100 of them. George commenced by giving us some information on the meaning of colours. Green being for nature, blue for the sky that only lasts a little while, yellow for the insects, the sun and the tiger, which has been used symbolically in so much of our psychic work. John Powell's always referred to us as the tiger. Brown brings studious thoughts and the reason for monks wearing a brown habit. And we do have the saying, a brown study. And he said, be observant and you will probably see someone from the past, someone from the present, and possibly someone from the future. But only Margot will see the former. She did. She saw George Lillo. And he was standing there, attired in an amber-coloured coat, embroidered with silver, brown breeches, beige socks, brown shoes, and his hair was black or dark brown, parted in the middle and worn at shoulder length. And she watched him appear from a mist that seemingly then became a physical presence, and then became light, and finally disappeared. There were plenty of people from the present strolling through the field, who were visible to us all, but no one from the future appeared that afternoon. However, when I looked up in the sky, there was a huge V-shaped cloud, and we'd all been watching a science fiction series on television. It was called V. And I mentioned this, and George commented that it was good that I saw the sign, but the programme was rubbish. And I remember I didn't like it very much. It was a bit negative. We were instructed to search the ground very carefully when returning to the car, as we might find something. So, with our heads bent, we wandered down the field towards the stile and found a tiny ivory-coloured pig, about an inch long. As we walked, I mentioned the passing of Richard Burton, who had been in the midst of making a film of George Orwell's book, Animal Farm. When we found the pig, Walter realised the significance, as the main character is Napoleon Boar, a pig of great stamina. Now, I don't know whether you can see that, but that's a picture of the little pig that I took. And the little pig is only half an inch long, but that's the picture. And below is Margot at the water trough. We returned to the field the following week and were chatting between ourselves as we made our way to our favourite spot not far from the water trough, where we would slake our thirst on a hot sunny afternoon. Margot bent down and picked up a camping hook that looked similar to a shepherd's hook, and then we found a golf ball that we later understood to represent the earth or world. It appeared that George was only able to see part of us, our spiritual and psychic natures, and our aura. He spoke of the significance of the little pig in relation to men from another galaxy, who are built like us, with ivory skin, but they have snout-like noses and small eyes. They are friendly towards Earth, but more out of a sense of the curious. Interesting. Haven't met them yet. Our next meeting with George was in August at Widcombe, not far from Knighton, where he disclosed that 100 years ago a UFO had landed nearby, and the occupants were were very similar to those seen by Ernest in Chipping Sodbury. It was a warm afternoon, and we sat beside a small rippling stream, and George gave us to understand that the ground where we had rested was very powerful and had once been the site of a monastery long before the Norman conquest. He said, "Be observant and walk slowly beside the water," which we did. And Margot was drawn to the bed of the stream beside a little bridge, where she found 3 small stones similar to moss agate. These stones had fallen from the belt of a visiting spaceman, and Margot was to take them home and boil them in water to remove a glue-like substance that, if it was left on, it would affect us by reducing our power. And then he emphasised the colour black, that we must avoid it at all costs, never to wear black, and to stay away from people who do, along with anyone who has anything to do with the left-hand path and people on unprescribed drugs. George told us about the black planet, whose beings are small and invisible to us. In a conversation we had, I mentioned that Richard Burton had spent the last hours of his life reading William Blake's poem Jerusalem and Tiger, Tiger. And George remarked that Richard now realised the adverse influence of black. He told us that in 1924 a spacecraft landed in Wiltshire, and the men who visited left 5 stones, hoping they would be discovered and realised to be alien. But this didn't happen. George was able to locate one of these stones and apport it to the field for us to find. This stone came from the shining planet, where all is laughter and muted colours, and was beamed down from a craft high over the Wiltshire countryside and not placed there by hand. Over and over again we're being told about the importance of the stones, and I remember in my last talk I spoke about the stones being almost godlike. And over and over again our attention is brought to stones. And his final words of wisdom gave us to understand that all open natural places and our field have far more power than any stone building, and to listen to these teachings is far better than listening to any man ranting from a pulpit. And I think he may have been making reference to churches and the vicar who was so unkind to Ernest. His consternation was that mankind had gone too far with his interference in nature, and we could end up a dead planet. I do hope he is wrong. And many years later, of course I didn't have access to the internet in those days, I did check out George Lillo, and according to Wikipedia, George Lillo lived from 1691 to 1739, became a partner in his father's goldsmiths and jewellery business in London, as well as being a dramatist, and The London Merchant is his most famous work. So he was the man who was talking to us, dressed in his 17th century or whatever, wherever he lived, dressed in his 17th century clothes. This happened sometime in 1983. We'd been rescuing the earthbound for some years, and we thought this was just going to be another earthbound case. And we were asked to go to Hoy's Monument, which is up on the Downs above Knighton, and we parked the car by the Hermitage, which is a big old house there, and took the footpath through the fields. And Margot and Wally were having some difficulty. It was quite steep to reach the monument. And we eventually got there and sat down. expecting to hear from another earthbound. Margot started writing. When she finished writing, and she said, this is different. And this is what she heard. I haven't got his actual script, but I've got the gist of what he said. He said his name was Tu, and he was an extraterrestrial from a planet called Va, that is situated somewhere in another galaxy as yet undiscovered by man. It is smaller than Earth. It has 3 land masses and 1 ocean. And he had once been the ruler of one of these lands, but explained that he was now in his spiritual body and had been watching over Earth for 150 years to find the correct channel for communication. Having found Margot, he hoped the 3 of us would accept him as our friend and teacher. He said his planet is vastly different from Earth, with pink, sandy soil and yellow vegetation. Their diet consists of plants and fruit, and we were asked to note the yellow foods available in our own diets, as it would be beneficial to eat more of them. All their colours are soft and muted, but not as numerous as those on Earth, as there are no dark shades of brown, green or blue, and definitely no black or grey. Anger and wars are unheard of and not understood, with the result that their technology is far in advance of humanity, and possibly the most advanced planet in all the galaxies, as there has been tremendous progress in the last 300 years, with spacecraft visiting all the planets in their own galaxy and others, including Earth, which is visited for observation purposes. As there is no disease, neither doctors nor healers are required, and a lifespan of 120 to 30 of our Earth years is normal, but they don't age after 50. The spirit of Tu said he was in communication with D, a soul still living on Va, and is able to tell him of our progress. Unfortunately, the beings from his planet would be unable to survive in our atmosphere without protective clothing, as our germs would kill them instantly. There was great concern at the level of chemical pollution on Earth, because it is killing our insects, and Tu would very much like us to see his beautiful planet. And so this first communication ended, with Tu saying he would bring us something to prove our existence. But these are called apports when they bring something through from spirit. And they demanifest something and remanifest it. How they do it, I don't know, but it's that they just do it. And as we approached the car on our return, Margot suddenly saw this silver light, and it just went down to the ground, and where it had touched the ground, there was a little bird sort of ornament, and it had pink tail feathers, but the tail feathers actually looked like a ballerina's tutu, which was, of course, Tu's name. And we were delighted to have that. Of course, Margot kept it. I haven't got any of these apports, sadly. Anyway, the next time we were asked to go to Chillerton Mast, which is another high place on the island, when we heard from Tu again. And his first words were not very complimentary, because according to him, the people of Earth are very primitive. Well, I think they are in comparison with what we've been told about these beings who communicate with us. On Va, they have been able to control the weather at the push of a button for 1,000 Earth years. And this I found very interesting. The megalith builders were far more advanced than our present civilization. The standing stones were used for healing and religious rites, but their original purpose had been for landing markers for men from another planet who were friendly towards Earth and came to teach mankind. Their planet burnt out and they were all destroyed, but those others from distant planets who came to Earth know the purpose of the stones. The people who came had pale green skin and beautiful golden eyes, and Tu was able to apport a small green button with a golden centre to illustrate the colours he meant, and this ended his second communication. Now I have got a picture of Tu's button, but I also have got the button itself, but there is the picture of Tu's button. And third time we heard from Tu, we went to Shorrell, by the inn. And in those days there was a field, big field beside the inn, but sadly it's now been built on, and a lot of modern houses there. But we sat down in the field, and this is what Margot heard. This is Tu, once ruler of Var, and he went on to speak of life on his planet. Only one child was allowed, and he had a son whose name was Tut, who was taken quite painlessly from his mother's womb at 3 months, as all children are, and kept in laboratory conditions until ready to live on his own. He told us there is power in the earth around the stones that is available for 1 in 20 persons. But as it is unknown, only 1 in 200 take advantage of it. The ancients were taught about the earth's power points by the visitors from other planets and shown how to erect the megalithic stones. Straight lines are on lays. Single standing stones are on a small power point, and the stone circles are on a spiral of power. Our insects, the gnats, can always be seen spiralling over a power source. And finally, Tu said we were very privileged to have this knowledge, as he fears Earth is going backwards. It was very interesting about the gnats, because outside my chalet where I lived in Downlands, I noticed in a certain part just outside, the gnats would always be circling, and they were always there, all summer. They'd just be circling round in this one space. So obviously there was a powerful point near my chalet. Margot then received a vision of a water fountain, which we were all asked to stand beneath in order to receive the water on our skin. Walter and I saw nothing, but Tu commented that he was glad of our faith, but sad we were blind. And that was the end of the information from Tu. I found it very interesting that he told us about the standing stones. I've had a lot of information since through Robin about the megalith structures. And we were anticipating another off-planet communication. But on May the 2nd, 1986, we had a disappointing message from one of Margot's guides, who said, "The men from the stars were on their way to Earth, but due to the Russian accident at Chernobyl and the radioactive leakage, they have had to turn back. So everything that happens on our planet is monitored, and we really do need to learn from this." 2 months later, In July, Margot contacted me for a matter of some urgency. Was causing her to feel physical discomfort. Her head felt as if it was twice the size, and her arms were leaden. Walter said she'd been particularly tetchy all morning, not able to muster up any enthusiasm for anything, and just curled up in a chair feeling cold. She felt under intense pressure and couldn't understand why her husband didn't know she needed to go somewhere. She had tried to control the situation, but eventually had to contact me, as it was a matter that had suddenly become imperative. We were told that we must go to Shoal Down, near the pond. When we arrived, there was no pond, just a dried up bog. Anyway, we sat down, put the rug on the ground, made ourselves comfortable, and waited to see who was going to talk to us. And a very strange story unfolded. Apparently, many months ago, a strange craft had landed in the field on the other side of the pathway, and one of the occupants, awed, had wandered over towards the pond, filled with curiosity, never having seen water before. He came from a place millions of miles away and was able to speak our language, in fact any language, but the craft had left without him. He panicked instead of remaining calm as he had been taught. The water was poisonous to him, and he died, and his body disintegrated. Ord was very small. He was only 16 inches high, and no one saw him. If he had stayed calm, he would not have been earthbound. He thought it was the water sprites who had told him that a lady with a light of silver like the moon would be coming to help him. And although Margot did not hear his voice, it was Ord who had caused the uncomfortable pressure as he called for her. He was now able to go onwards and leave the earth, adding that one day we would not only see a craft from his planet, but also one of his companions. I might tell you this little being touched my heart. Having seen the film E.T., I thought of E.T. He was like E.T., he was trapped here and he didn't know how to go home. And I was very glad that we had rescued him. So our life goes on with the extraterrestrials. Or as Jane Taylor, Margot's guide, calls them, the men from the stars. Those enigmatic men from the stars. This was July the 13th, 1986. Twice round Mars, once round Moon, you may find it very soon. Dropped it from a high, far away from prying eye. Margot said the strange voice sounded as though it belonged to an old 78 gramophone record, but it seemed feminine and monosyllabic, and we were all sitting under an oak tree on a field at Alverstone, and laughed out loud as Margot read these words. They certainly gave us food for thought, and we concluded something had been dropped from a craft into this lonely field that we were supposed to find, but had no idea what. On the ground before us was a circular shape made by a series of rabbit burrows, and we knew from experience that UFO circles at Seven Sisters Field that rabbits do appear to be attracted to them. A short time passed in speculation, and then Margot wrote again, as the strange voice told us that 6 stones of power had been left on this island, another 6 on an island to the south, and a further 6 on one to the east. There was a stone for us to find, which was pinken on one side for psychic telepathy, and mauve on the other side for power. The voice concluded that it would speak at a later date when time allowed. We walked towards the rabbit circle and searched diligently for the pinkened stone. Margot felt a power surge at a certain point where two rough stones lay on the ground, each about 2 to 3 inches in diameter. I picked up one to find underneath a most unusual pink stone, about the size and shape of a kidney bean. It was polished and beautifully marked, similar to malachite. It was mauve on the reverse, with 3 tiny red spots and a single brown one. They were only about this size, very tiny, but absolutely beautiful. The 3 of us were overjoyed about this turn of events and finding this tiny precious stone of power. Walter wanted more answers. After all, he was a retired chemical scientist with a very analytical mind. Margot took up her pencil, but it was the voice of John Powell's, to say that the other 5 stones were different in colour, each in a separate location, and with time and patience we would be led to find them all. 10 days later, on the 23rd of July, John Powell's gave us the go-ahead to search for the second stone. All 6 stones have to be in her possession for their power to be properly understood and used. Walter felt we needed to go to the 5 barrows, the Stone Age burial mounds at Brook, and her guidance confirmed this. We came to a grassy hollow, walking along the path to the barrows where we settled down to wait. The ground was a riot of harebells and mauve scabious, yet another of nature's gardens. John Powell spoke tersely and to the point, as he always does, telling us we were in the correct place and must search thoroughly, parting the grass carefully with our hands. We followed his instructions, crawled around the sheltered hollow, until Margot became aware of a strange pulling sensation she often experiences. She paused to say the stone was somewhere just in front of her, and we gently moved the grass aside and discovered a small amber-coloured stone, very thin, flat, and shaped like a fish. We learnt the second stone was for physical energy. In our search for the third stone, we were guided back to Hoy's monument at the top of St. Catherine's Down. Wandered slowly along the footpath toward the old monk's cell known as the Pepper Pot, until called to a halt when a beautiful blue dragonfly caught my attention. Down on our knees again, scratching around in the grass, and a moth suddenly flew up from the ground where Margot was looking and brought to light another exquisite tiny stone. Similar in size to the others, pink on one side, quite dense with striations of blue and white. Translucent on the reverse, it was white with tiny circular crystal-like formations inside. It was very thin with 2 completely different surfaces. The pink side was for telepathy and the white for healing. 3 down, 3 to go. 27th of July, 4 days later, on our way to the chalk hollow at Chillerton. And with faith and hope we trudged up the well-worn path to the top of the hill, where the wild knapweed and field scabious edged the fields with a profusion of purple and mauve, and a myriad butterflies danced with joy. A cock pheasant took off with his raucous cry, in sudden fright at our approach. But he needn't have worried, for we wished him no harm. We reached the familiar chalk pit, where we had once heard from 2, but Margot was drawn even higher. We settled in a small hollow at the summit, awaiting further instruction. The metallic voice was back. In some purple and some white beamed a stone through the light. This was spoken in her ear, and before us, in glorious profusion, were purple full-blown thistles and a great many white stones. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Without Margot's gift, we'd never find these As we searched among the purple and the white, Margot heard the voice of her guide, Captain Bennett, say, "Part the grass with your hands." We gently did so, to bring a small two-tone amber-coloured stone into view, a small indentation at one end resembling a mouth and a black spot at the other. It was revealed that this spot is for soothing, not to be used lightly, only when one is in a very stressful condition and feels like screaming. The meaning of this very powerful stone is to be given at a later date. We were told all the stones came from a mine. On August the 1st, we were on the trail again to Cain-Iton, and the footpath beside the land where the Gorges once stood, the finest manor house on the Isle of Wight. It was razed to the ground by the owner in order that his daughter should not inherit, as he disapproved of her husband. Yes, that's so true. As we wandered slowly along, Margot felt the familiar stop signal, and we waited for instructions. The stone lay in the strip of grass growing in the centre of the path, so we began parting the grass. And Margot felt some strange force pushing her hand into the ground and drew out a cream-coloured stone of similar size to the others. It had the appearance of an amniotic sac enclosing an embryo, and there even seemed to be a fine red blood vessel and a spot that we equated with an eye or a heart. And that afternoon we learnt that we were dealing with a race of beings about 2 feet high, which answered our query as to why the stones were so small. And later in the week we journeyed to Whale Chine, and with the help from John Powell's located the 6th and final one, a small, triangular, translucent white stone with 2 lines and a milky, wavy transparency. The question now was, why had we been given these stones? And did I ever get the answer? Did Margot ever get the answer? No, we didn't. We just had to search. Have the faith to search for these stones and go all over the island, listen to the metallic voice and find these tiny stones, which obviously had great power, but we were never told how to use these stones, which was rather sad. Then Whit Monday 1987 was to see the beginning of a further series of communication from the men from the stars. And the first one was from Crocker Lane. We had to go to Crocker Lane in Knighton, which is where I lived until recently. I lived beside Crocker Lane and knew it very well. And Margot heard, "Contact, contact, contact." These words from a being who said he had last spoken many moons ago and referred to us as earthlings. He would like to try and make contact with people in positions of power, but knew he would be destroyed like an animal. However, during the coming weeks, he would tell us about his home, about health on his planet, and their spacecraft. He came in a large ship after the snows on the island, and with 3 other companions, 2 males and a female, left the larger craft in a smaller one, which landed not far from where we sat. The air was fresh then, but now the accident at Chernobyl and continuing nuclear tests have damaged and polluted the whole Earth, not just Europe. The effects of this will be seen in babies being born deformed, children dying, and strange insects and diseases affecting mankind. The damage to the earth can now be seen that the sun is shining. When he visited the earth, he left a small green stone and some pieces of a soft metal broken from an instrument he was carrying, each piece marked with the symbol of their team. We found the metal pieces, and the stone will be used to make contact easily. A week later, on Sunday afternoon, we drove to the start of the Jubilee Trail on Bryston Down, where contact was resumed. He told us he was the grandson of Keys, the very first alien being to speak to Margot. And I have nothing about Keys. All I can remember is that we went to a little quarry, which is on the way to, it's just off the Brading Downs. You turn down to the right to go to Ryde, and there's a little quarry halfway down that hill. And we were told to go there one morning, and someone spoke to us, and he told us his name was Keys, but I cannot remember what he said. And all I know, he was the very first communication from an alien that we actually had. So this is the grandson of Keys. And he said they are able to tune in perfectly to one another's thoughts. They don't use speech as we know it, but telepathy, and it was as if he had been the speaker. They are also able to communicate with those in a different existence after the transition we call death. That would be so nice for us, wouldn't it? But at the moment we don't have, or very few people have that ability, Margot being one of them. He told us there were 4 kinds of food on his planet, and he thought all of ours would be harmful to them. Unlike Earthlings, gossip is unnecessary as their thoughts are visible to all. There is no need for music or entertainment, as their power of visualization brings whatever they require into being. But all material things have to be earned. Only one child is allowed, but should that child meet with an accident before 10 years old, then they are permitted to have another, and their lifespan is around 120 years. He went on to say that noise causes damage to our health, also long speeches, although he felt our leaders would not agree. I thought about the last statement and realised the stress put upon us all, listening to the contents of our politicians' speeches with the resulting adrenaline that is poured into the body. Finally, he stated that the simpler one's life becomes, the more intelligent one becomes. And I can agree with that, having simplified my life and removed myself from the media circus. 10 days later, we drove to the 5 Barrows, Stone Age burial mounds, for further information from our space being, to learn that they are similar to us in appearance, but with a larger head. And they all have the same hair colour. I found his explanation of their houses very interesting, as they are far more colourful than ours, with sloping walls that they lean upright against when they need what we know as sleep. But it is totally unlike ours, as they only require 15 minutes rest period, during which they have visions of the next 24 hours or so, and so don't have a particular time for sleeping as we do. And he explained he was able to speak through a beam. A week later, Margot showed me the small pieces of metal we had picked up with the green stone. They had been kept in a small matchbox, as she had been asked to keep them separate from the stone. On the previous day, it appeared they were disintegrating, but now it seemed as if a miniature explosion had occurred inside the box, as all that remained was a grey dust. Brading Down was our next destination, and commenting on the breakup of the metal pieces, the alien said there was more power around than elsewhere that objects had been left, and we presumed he meant more power around Margot. Then he made a very strange request. He asked us to leave some sweaty clothes on a high place in order for them to test human acidity, to find out about the human body, how the human body works, as it is quite different from their own, adding that no harm would come to us. None of us were very happy about this. I recalled that in the mythology of the little people, the fairies exercised power over humans by having something belonging to them. And John Powell's explained this was not so with the aliens, and it would be all right to assist them. However, Jane Taylor, another of Margot's guides, later said that although the aliens meant no harm to us this time, she felt they would make more and more demands upon us in the future, and it would be wiser not to commit ourselves. We were supposed to be learning from them, not them from us. So they didn't get our sweaty clothes, and they weren't too pleased about it. We had to go to the top of Rue Down to hear again, but in spite of the awful weather, Margot was able to make contact with the alien, who was most annoyed that we, through fear, had refused to cooperate with him on the sweaty issue. He said they do not know or understand emotions, neither fear, happiness, sadness, love, nor hate, and always obey without question. Though they would find another way to conduct their experiments. I did wonder about the annoyance he seemed to express, for it did seem a bit like an emotion to me. We wondered why he had not been forthcoming with his name, and he said there is no sound in our language to pronounce his name, but the nearest we could get is our humming noise. He left us with a final shot in the eye, informing us that they are far superior in intellect than humanity. I remember thinking he told us he had a big head. That was my comment. And a few years passed before we heard again from the star beings. And it was in June 1990 we had a very pleasant surprise. The three of us went to Seven Sisters Field, where we had previously come across a circular mark. And apparently, many years ago in that field, a UFO had landed. And the mark is still there today. And that's many, many, many years ago. And where it had actually landed, it didn't leave a scorch mark, but the grass had grown much higher than the grass around and was darker green. I say it's still there today. It may not be still there today now because I haven't been there for a few years. I haven't been able to walk up there. But it was there when we used to work up there. And so we saw it the landing was in 1976, apparently, we were told. And some people had actually witnessed I think they'd seen something from the radio station, but I don't think many people were prepared to talk about it. It was Ord, the little being, who we had rescued from Shorrell in 1986. He'd been resting since then, but now was ready to incarnate once more on his own beautiful planet. Apparently he doesn't have to wait as long as we do between lives, as his time is different from ours. He had the opportunity to preview his new life, a very happy one, as he was to be a leader of his people due to his great knowledge. Ord wished to thank us and to say that not all creatures from other planets are bad or rude. I think he must have been referring to our previous communicator. He knew we were all sympathetic to his predicament on Earth and commented that his speech was much clearer, and it gave us much joy to hear from this little being. Can you imagine him? He's only 16 inches high. Dear little soul. In August, Margot received information from her guide, Jane Taylor, to the effect that the authorities will always deny the existence of spacecraft. But the men from the stars have been very active lately, as they are afraid of what might happen to Earth if a big war breaks out, because they have already lost the life force of 2 planets in their galaxy through wars. They are not happy about actually meeting with those in authority, whether in England or elsewhere in the world, but do wish for peace between all nations and planets. The following day, we drove to Crocker Lane to help an earthbound, and her name is Edith. I appear to have been forgotten. Many years ago they called me the Lady in Grey, but no one does any more. They do not see me like they did. I was a housemaid at a large house in Knighton at the turn of the century. My name is Edith. One hot night I crept out of the house and walked up onto the downs. Cook was fast asleep, and Mary was walking out with her young man, so no one heard me go. I reached the top of the field when I tripped over a log and hurt my ankle. I sat down. The moon was full that night. I took my buttoned boot off, and to my dismay, my ankle swelled up. How was I to get back? I then saw 3 men. At least I thought they were 3 men. They were coming towards me. I was very frightened. One heard such tales about men with a lonely woman at night. They stopped a few yards away, and I asked them what they wanted. Instead of answering, their eyes flashed like green lights. They appeared to be speaking through their eyes to each other. They wore strange clothing, a silvery sort of suit in one piece, and they had long hair. Then a very strange thing occurred. One of them approached me and knelt down and touched my throbbing ankle. His touch was warm, in fact quite hot. The swelling went down and the pain had gone. I hastily put my boot on, but could not do up the buttons as my hands were trembling so. The men then walked a little further away. A funny-shaped silvery object appeared, rather like half a tennis ball. 2 of the men entered it, and the 3rd man came towards me again. He held out his hand, and I felt compelled to take it. He led me to this strange object and pointed to the door. I was terrified and pulled away. His green eyes lit up and flashed. Then he uttered one word. It sounded like Zekalinka. I ran off, thankful that my ankle was not hurting, but conscious of my unbuttoned boot that felt so loose. I reached the house to find no one had discovered my absence. I told no one. I worked at the house for some years. When I died, I found I was back here looking for the men instead of going onwards. I have stayed, hence the name Lady in Grey. Now I shall go towards heaven. Will I meet them? I hope so, to thank them for their help with my foot. Goodbye. The following day, Jane Taylor's said to Margot, "You heard an interesting story yesterday. It is quite true, and Edith now rests. There are many different types of souls who live on other planets, some like men, some quite different. Those with the green eyes, like Edith met, are not the ones who have made the circles in the corn. I do not know what colour their eyes are, but they do not flash and talk with their eyes instead of their mouths. There are many coming to Earth, and much will be learnt from the earthbound who have had UFO experiences. On the morning of August the 18th, Margot was in her kitchen and happened to glance out of the window towards St Boniface Down to see a bright orange flash of light in broad daylight. And it is evident we have a very close relationship with the men from the stars who are so concerned for our welfare. Yet they are finding it very difficult to get their message across because of the persistent ignorance of the mass of humanity, particularly our so-called leaders. In August 1991, we made a visit to the duck pond at Hardingshoot. There were strange marks in the crop fields around about there that had both male and female reactions to the pendulum. We had a pleasant surprise as the communicator was awed once more, the little being we had rescued so many years ago. He now felt he knew Margot and felt quite at ease with her, and was glad we had come, as the next day would have been too late. It was the day of his reincarnation into a new body. Unlike Earthlings, he would have total recall of his past life. He repeated he is to be a leader of his people, that he is only 16 inches tall, and if Margot took a clean sheet of paper, he would assist her to make a drawing of him. He was aware that due to inclement weather, we had been able to go to our favourite field at Whitwell, so he had guided us to the duck pond, as he is still fascinated by water. It is unnecessary where he comes from. He wished us goodbye for the final time, and good luck in all we do. And that was the end of Ord and just a few of the extraterrestrials who've been speaking with us. Now this is a photograph of Margot in a crop circle using her dowsing rods. There is one more that I want to read to you today. Margot and I wrote a little booklet, and it was called The Answer. This is the booklet. And it was about ETs and crop circles, after we'd been involved in rescuing so many ghosts who had spoken of their own experiences with UFOs and craft from space. And it was their curiosity or fear that kept them earthbound. And this is Javanesha, one of those who visited Earth in her ship. My name is Javanesha. I came in a small spaceship which disintegrated near here. There were 4 of us in it, 2 females, including me, and 2 males. We had come from a larger ship just outside your atmosphere, with 20 crew members on board. We came from a planet trillions of miles away. We came in peace to make markers in the fields where crops grow. Already 2 had been made by us in a place you call Wiltshire. We circled over to make one in a field near here, but something went wrong. We came too close to water, and that caused the trouble, and we became specks of dust. This, by the way, was at Freshwater Bay on the Isle of Wight. As I was in charge, it was my fault, and here I have remained. I am happy to be able to communicate with you, who has great powers, hearing me like this. I am speaking in a tongue strange to me, which you understand. My name, Javanesha, means star in space, which meant I was to spend my life travelling from one planet to another. We are given names which determine what we do in life. We came in peace, and to show this we made energy marks and circles in your fields. The circles are to show the shape of our ships. We are like you in many ways. Our reproductive organs are different. We do not carry young as long as females on earth. We live far longer and do not age like earth people. We do not require entertainment, as this is a waste of energy, and we stay happily with the same partner all our lives and choose to work together. It is unfortunate I became trapped. I stayed near this cliff and pool. At times it has been pleasant, but not always. I have only been here a year or so. Now I shall continue my journey through space to another planet, presumably where we will all meet one day. I hope she's right. I'm grateful to have made contact with such an agreeable Earth person, and hope your planet survives the punishment it receives from those who dwell on it. Well, that's all I'm going to tell you about today. There are many more to be told, which in due course I shall tell you of. But I gather last time that the picture of Ramunas was not available to everyone who wanted to see. So I believe that you have a picture that you will show. But there are also a few words that I would like to give you from Margot about Ramunas. I would like to, if I could find them. Yes. After about 6 months after Ramunas died, Margot was going upstairs one morning and she looked up and Ramunas was standing on the landing and he was surrounded in a lovely golden light and he was standing there in his favourite clothes, the clothes he had on in the photograph. And he said, "Hello, Margot." She said, "Hello, Ramunas." And he said, "I've got over the experience of dying. I've seen my mother." His mother died when he was 17. "Please, will you go and see Reg and Carolyn and tell them I love them?" And that was his message. And then he vanished. So needless to say, Margot rang me up and said, "I'm coming up." And she walked up and she told Reg and I what Ramunas had said. And he stood there just as if he was in the body standing there. No different. And it was a very joyous moment, although very tearful for us as well. Because when these things happen, when you've loved someone, as Reg and I loved Ramunas like a son, it can be very, very moving. Anyway, that was the first time that he came. And the second time, I'd given Margot a basket of chrysanthemums. And when the chrysanthemums died, she'd planted them in the garden. But she'd kept the basket. And then she'd had some azaleas given her. So she thought, I know what I'll do. I'll put those in Ramunas' basket. So she placed them in the basket, and then she went in the room to dust one day. And she was looking at the basket, and then she turned away and she looked back at the basket of azaleas, and Ramunas was standing there. But he was in more of a mist this time. But he was standing there, and he had one arm out, and he was holding something, and he was pointing with his other hand to what he was holding. And she said it was a long metal rod or stake or something. And when she told me about it, I said, I know. She had no idea. He didn't say anything, and she had no idea why he was holding this metal rod. And I said, I know exactly why he was holding that metal rod. I said it was a garden stake about 3 feet long that he threw down the well. I said, and he started poking about at the bottom of the well with this stake. I said, and that was what caused the well to collapse on him. Anyway, we now know that he is perfectly happy wherever he is. He was actually going to the halls of learning to become a guide. My youngest daughter has seen him on numerous occasions. She was very, very close to him. And in fact, I might have said this, she had to tell him to go away because he was interfering too much with her life. But that was just the end of Ramunas. I might tell you something. Zoe said, my youngest daughter Zoe said to me the other day, pardon me, she said, Margot's around, Mum. I said, how do you know, dear? She said, well, I was walking along through Warminster the other day. She said, and this woman was coming towards me, and suddenly Margot's face appeared on this woman's face. And I said to her, well, that is called transfiguration. Many years ago, I used to visit a medium who had that gift. And he was able to sit with an audience of people and dim light, and his face would change, and people in the audience would recognise the face that was on the top of his own face or over his own face. And so yes, I feel she is about at the moment. I must say I do ask her to be with me when I'm reading her work, because it's so important. Her work is really, really important. And so often the men from the stars say how concerned they are about our planet. And as you know, 2 of their planets were burnt out. And we have the capacity to do that to our own planet. And we just have to pray and keep shining the light and being positive. No matter what's going on in the world, we have to continue to be positive, continue to be holders of the light, bearers of the information, and share the information that we have. And so I will continue to share the information, and it won't be negative. Anyway, thank you, Sam, for recording this. I hope you've enjoyed it.